Okay, so this is a 2-week edition because of football last week. I'll try and whip through things. Don't forget to send stuff there, and also you can look at previous YouTube editions and collections of slides. Okay, big news. Transport Action Network, action against the £27 billion road building programme, the High Court, 29th of June. There's people from some of the anti-road building protests like Stonehenge and Winsome Link and so on. Right, and actually Steve Norris, who, former transport minister and someone who we've come up against more recently in anti-Twitter spats, actually coming out against the Stonehenge decision, and I said he's exactly right, and he said thank you to me. So be nice to people on Twitter and they will be nice to you back sometimes. Jeremy Vine, who, whatever you think of him, he does do some very interesting videos. Here's a trucker who, was giving him orders as a sort of member of the superior species. And I actually took a screenshot from the video that found it was Thames Materials, who are rated gold standard under the Fleet Operators Recognition Scheme, and sent in stuff about that to them, plus fours, plus the operator. And you can try doing that stuff as well if you're on Twitter or social media of one kind or another. Right, now a very good thread from Adam Tranter about the all-powerful bicycle lobby. And because details of meetings taken by all transport ministers are recorded, ministers met with cycling representatives 0.6% of their total meetings, which you can see just there. And you can see a lot for rail, a lot for aviation, and shipping there, and guess what, quite a lot of meetings from motor vehicles general and people who are basically supporting the status quo. So always worthwhile following Adam Tranter. Right, this was on the 2nd, the Times continues its gruesome thing. This is its main story: gas and car bills to soar under the Green Revolution. The average cost of running a petrol car could rise by more than £2 a week. £2 a week, yes. So that's the top story in the Times, tells you a lot about them. Don't forget the letter from Rupert Furness from the DFT. That is still in the background. That's 3 weeks ago, but it's important. And all the things in that letter, very important, that have been asked for by government, by the Department for Transport. Now, Mark Strong got his MP to submit a question on Part 6 of Traffic Management Act 2004, and here is the reply. So the idea is that we would be looking to December for regulations to commence Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act 2004. And you can read that, and Mark can tell you more about it if you want. Now, there was a whisper that Chris Boardman could be heading up Active Travel England. Don't forget, he's become Transport Commissioner for Manchester, as well as Cycling Commissioner. So that would be interesting, but do note that he's been appointed chair of Sport England. He, above anybody else, knows there's a difference between cycling as sport and cycling as everyday transport. And if you look at the Sport England brief, it does actually refer to general activity as well as specifically organised sport. So the still could be a link with active travel in there. Yeah, I wanted to say some things about the Tour de France. Now, repeat the point that cycling as sport is very different from cycling as everyday travel. However, in a country with a sort of anti-cycling culture, because people have stopped doing everyday cycling as much as they did in the 50s, people may look at cycle sport and telly and think, oh, that's cycling. And that's why you get images of racing cyclists turn up in by not very together comms people when talking about active travel. And for me, I mean, as well as being an active travel person is the most important thing about cycling, I am also a cycle sport fan. Were a lot of crashes in the Tour de France in the first week. And I was just thinking, well, hey, a lot of people are going to be looking at this and thinking, oh, that cycling thing, it's very dangerous. You know, people keep on falling off and everything. Also, I'm worried that people might think, oh, well, they fall off, but, you know, it's not too bad. They seem to get up and walk about afterwards. So maybe some people are not too intelligent might be thinking, well, if I knock into them, hey, you know, they're always falling off and they don't seem to be too bad. So I think it's a very negative set of images. And there's been some concern about it on Twitter with some people saying, oh, we really have to distance ourselves from cycle sport, and other people like David Hembrow saying, don't let them divide us. So just pointing that out. I have done some work in the past on the relative risk of obtaining a serious injury when cycling, comparing a rider in the Tour de France and an everyday commuter in London, and using exposure and doing so in terms of time. I've worked out the chance of getting a serious injury in the Tour de France is about 40 to 70 times higher than cycling to work every day in London. Oh, here's a long but must-read thread on Ealing LTNs, and it's relevant to everything from mini Hollands to any other measures to cut car use, and it's about referendums. And it's from Leo Murray on Twitter about Ealing Council ignoring best practice on public engagement, going along with ignorant attitudes, a hideously misconceived proposal for a yes-no referendum on every one of the low traffic neighborhoods. This is an approach that's designed to block change. Do look at that thread by Leo. You'll really learn an awful lot about everything that needs to happen in terms of referendums. Do remember what happened with the congestion charge. The issue is raised, there's a lot of opposition, then you manage to get it in, and after a while everybody kind of accepts it. That's the way we need to go forward, not what Labour have done in Ealing. There is also consultation in Ealing, which, despite the fact that this referendum business is misconceived, if you live in Ealing, if you're a resident, do get stuck into that consultation. That point about how people say, oh yeah, we'll go along with it, and then they get all upset when they see what is actually raised. His poem for Bertolt Brecht: when it's a notion, when it's vague, it is praised. When it looms large, when plans are in motion, objections are raised. And that's every council that's decided on or not everyone, but most councils that are keen on climate emergencies and have said things for the last 30 years about supporting cycling and walking. When you actually get the measures up, then you start getting the objectors. And as Leo points out, it's a bad idea to go into referendums. The experience of mini Hollands, of congestion charges that you have to press on. You do engage people, but remember, you're always going to get a 10, 20% mob of people who are just opposed to anything, and press ahead and you'll find that most people at least go along with you. The evidence, the all-party parliamentary cycling group, that has to be sent in by 16th of July. Do send something in. They've already got a program. It's all about CWIS 2, getting the next cycling walking investment strategy done properly. Here's the DCS Andy Cox page. And on that this week I have, here's the thing about him saying only a 6.5-year driving ban for a drunk driver who killed 2 people and seriously injured another. Why not just have a long-term driving ban? That's for a serving senior police officer to say these kind of things is very important. Do follow Andy and do give support to him in various ways. He's got quite a following. You should be following him. Here's an interesting bit of police social media work. I took a couple of tweets. I got 228 likes and 42 RTs in 2 days because I put this up from someone who said, "Dear cyclists, think it's acceptable to cycle in the middle of the road. You're a dickhead. Yours sincerely, me." So Roads Policing Unit, Surrey Police said, "Dear Meg, we've DM'd you. Yours sincerely, the police X." I love the X there. And that was a nice bit of the social media work that Surrey Police have done in the past. Do get on their Twitter threads or Facebook pages and saying, "We really like your messaging, what you're saying." It's important because there are some good police officers out there and they need your support. Good video from Edinburgh Police about close passing. Do take a look at that. Scotland Roads Policing also doing that. Here's the diversity page. Don't forget, Women's Festival of Cycling from 17th of July, 1st of August. Do register an event. Kidical Mass on the 11th of July in central London. And there's a new survey on inclusive cycling from Wheels for Wellbeing. Don't forget, Isabel Clement, I think, is doing a charity climb of the Millennium Dome. So that will be interesting. Do support her on that. Okay, new stuff to read. I'll just whip through these. Must read is The 5 Flaws Failing Laws, about what Roger Geffen is going to be talking about later. And also new is a good webinar run by London Cycling Campaign yesterday. That's up on YouTube now. What people want Sadiq can't do. Nice to see Susan Claris there with a very interesting concept of transport gluttony. Yes, I like that. Okay, there's what's also new is something done on health and community severance there, including Professor Jenny Mindel. Good point made by Laura Laker on a thread about the making of mass optional public transport. It might put a lot of us off. That will have an adverse effect on congestion. So I don't know if Mayor Khan can actually do something about that on underground and buses, at least in London. But it's a big thing. I also like saying a lot about the whole mask thing, that we've somehow got this idea with a lot of people confused, thinking that masks are for your own good as opposed to other people good. And I think that's very much to do with the whole way in which road safety and other public health messages have confused doing something for your own good with regard to a measure, as opposed to doing something for other people's good. Most obvious example being seatbelts, about which you can read a lot on the RDRF website. Just a bit of crossover there, which I think is important for us, because the whole COVID thing is how this present blast of activity got going, and we need to keep in touch with what's going on there. Okay, in the UK, what's happening? School Streets, Oxfordshire. Oh yes, this from East Renfrewshire. No, we don't like that. Hertfordshire, yeah, go and have a look at what's planned there and their consultation. And they've developed proposals for 8 schemes in 6 towns across Hertfordshire. £6.4 million is been awarded, including for a supposedly Dutch roundabout in Hemel Hempstead. So if you're in Hertfordshire, do get in on that consultation on the proposals. Bad news from Brighton and Hove. The Labour Party have called for the Old Shoreham Road cycle lanes to be scrapped. Lane Hills may say something about that at the end. Edinburgh, yeah, there was demonstration to save Lanark Road, a critical mass ride. Do look at the video on that. A lot of people out there to issuing an amendment offering a stay of execution. I don't know what happened around about Lanark Road after that demonstration. Wirral, local press producing a quote from a satisfied advertising customer, in this instance, the former leader of the Conservative group, who personally started a crowdfunder against plans for segregated cycle lanes in the area in summer 2020. So they're using his positive experience as an advert. Halton, yeah, I mentioned that in the previous one. Since that, I've been told that when these monstrosities went in, the curb was actually there, and then they extended the curb. Well, if they did extend the curb, they should have stuck these things outside the curb, where they shouldn't have been on the footway in the first place. Okay, but I don't know if that's true. It's just something I heard on Twitter. Anyway, they're bad, and I hope the blind lobby are all over them. In London, Devonshire Road in Chiswick to be reopened to through traffic. Jeremy Vine took these photos. In Barnet, yeah, the Conservative MP asked the Secretary of State what plans he has to improve the local environment for cycling and walking. Well, you know, if he's MP for Hendon, he ought to know about Transport for London and how it's funded and the Active Travel Emergency Fund and all the rest of it, rather than asking questions to the minister. Anyway, that's the guy in Barnet. And don't forget LCC's tweets on Westminster's plan for Oxford Street, which are not good for cycling. Greenwich, Rob asked Royal Parks to reopen Greenwich Park to through traffic. That's, you know, it does seem to be a lot of bad news. There is some good news though. In Hackney, an anti-low traffic neighbourhood group member advocates creating a misleading impression. I'm using my words carefully. Saying, could everyone in the group who drives please drive up and down Dalston Lane for the next few days, except when you're at the demo. So yes, trying to not exactly create the impression of what is actually happening. I don't know if anybody actually monitored how many people were on the demo. Yes, now I thought I'd take this account from the Hackney Gazette, and I've put in bold some of the words which are used in this piece, which was on the front page of the Hackney Gazette. So Hackney Council has raked in 2.7 million by fining drivers £130 a pop for breaching controversial low traffic neighbourhood rules. Parking officials have slapped drivers with 70,000 penalty charge notices since the scheme was introduced. Hackney issued a staggering 44,000 PCNs, and an internal council analysis revealed that 82% of the drivers fined didn't even live in the borough, sparking accusations that drivers are treating Hackney as a rat run. Sparking accusations about something which we've known has been happening for a long time anyway. So that's a note on local press wording. In Brent, there's a model LTN website, which you should go to if you want to see a nice LTN website. Now, this is the current situation in Tottenham Court Road in Camden. This has been a long-running saga, and please remember it's part of a very big set of schemes, including turning one ways, two ways, etc., etc. So don't pile in on Camden just for this. There are reasons for it looking like that, but you know, you may want to think that it's not really as good as Camden could have made it, but just leave it up there. In Brent, they've actually done a bit of road build. Road build to improve traffic flow. So Brent Cycling Campaign is likely taking the piss out of them, providing an alternative route to improve traffic flow in the area. It'll probably get filled up very soon if it hasn't already. Sutton 11 school streets approved. Important good news from Lambeth. The High Court rejects the challenge to Lambeth's low traffic neighbourhoods. That's very good news. Do take a look at that. And there's the legal stuff in detail for those of you who are fighting judicial reviews about low traffic neighbourhoods. This is about the ferry across Hammersmith Bridge. Trying to make it, and the bridge when it's temporarily rebuilt, there for people walking and cycling, please, those of you who live near there. This bad news from Greenwich again. Planters to be replaced by cameras in West Greenwich's low traffic neighbourhood. The cabinet member for transport said they could be used to provide more flexible, oh dear, low traffic neighbourhoods. This is something we're looking at, using it at specific locations. Make them a cul-de-sac for certain hours of the day, but allow traffic through for 1 or 2 hours at peak time just to alleviate things in the short term. That will really knock away the foundations of what LTNs are supposed to do. You won't see restriction in motor traffic usage enough, and you won't make it properly that much safer for people walking and cycling. And another thread by Leo Murray on what Ealing is doing with regard to referendums. There's the new push on low LTNs by Lewisham Council. Do get onto that if you live there. Some good news for Enfield. Counts reveal big increases in walking and cycling on Fox Lane. There's some good news. Here's some other news from a Labour member who supported LTNs in Ealing, and as Ealing Cycling Campaign say, the numbers are in, and whether you believe the LTNs caused the drop in pollution or not, one thing is certain. Boundary roads pollution went down when LTNs went in. They do not increase pollution. So that's an important bit of info. And here's something, it's from Arnold Schwarzenegger, who some of you know I like collecting photographs of him on his bike, particularly because he doesn't wear a helmet and he's refused to even in Australia. He, as you know, is Austrian. His father fought for the Nazis in the war, and he's always been very anti-racist. And he says he had a friend, Jew, who died recently. Here he is posing in front of the synagogue, and he says, look at how far we can come in one generation, and ask yourself, what are you doing to be more inclusive and more tolerant than the generation before you? Thanks, Arnie. A nice advert on the tube here from Best Vehicle 2021 from Specialized. And finally, a drawing by Frank Patterson. This is us oldies who did these wonderful line drawings of cycling when there were few cars about in the golden age of cycling in the 30s and also a bit in the 50s, I think. So that's it. Thank you. I don't know if Elaine wants to say something about about Brighton.
Well, let's crack on this week, unless it's a really vital one. So I'm going to ask the questions in the chat, because there's like quite a lot to get through.
Yeah,
so I think if we can get something in very quickly, because
very quickly, Elaine. Yeah.
Go on then.
Yeah, I mean, I can just say what happened is that we have 4 schemes that we want to go ahead of segregated cycle routes. One of them is out of the city to the west. Lots of sort of people are against it, but it's a route that has children cycling along it. There's schools along there, and it's a really good route out of the city. But it's fraught with problems because it's a temporary scheme, and it's, you know, tinkering has to happen a little bit. And Labour have decided not to support it, which throws a lot of our plans out, because basically we are a minority administration. They actually introduced it themselves when they were in administration. That's the annoying thing. Well, one of the many annoying things. And now they want it, you know, the work that Office have done, thinking about it, moving forward, thinking about how it will evolve to a permanent scheme is going. And it just feels like a tragedy. But we still don't know how we're going to play it. We're worried about how it will affect our tranche 3 bid. There's a lot of, I've been in talks with officers and other, you know, members today. We still don't know, so I won't say any more on it, but it's just sad. So if anyone sees anything on it and wants to comment on how sad it is on Twitter, we love lots of noise around how Labour have really, I think, let active travel down in the city.
All right, there's the challenge there then. All right, I'm going to crunch through the gears tonight and introduce our first next speaker. Caroline, I know you have to leave early, so I thought I'd stick you on.
Oh, you also have to leave at 10 past.
Anyway. Yep, you're on next.
Cool.
Honest. Cheers, pal.
Are you happy to put the video on then, Brian?
Yeah, I'll sort that out.
It's only 2 minutes, and that'll do instead of slides.
And you can all see that.
Brian, we can't hear the sound because you need to do the share sound radio button before you share your screen. So if you come out of screen share, do the screen share again, and then there's a little radio button at the bottom that says share my sound.
Right, so I'll stop sharing, yeah? Share sound, okay. All good?
I don't think so, Brian. I can still see the pause screen.
Share sound, hit that. What's come out of this?
If it doesn't work, I'll just send the link round and people can watch it later.
I might be way too stupid to do this. But...
Is that better in terms of saving time?
The sound on now?
Kind of frozen, Brian. I'm going to stop you sharing for you. Just try again now. Go on.
From Wembley to Streatham, from Hounslow to Stratford, London has a problem, a car problem. Every year, thousands of people are killed prematurely by toxic air and injured on London's roads. In the past, we've accepted the harms caused by cars, but now we need a complete and rapid culture change if we are to avoid irreversible climate damage. There's been fantastic progress in some parts of London. Boroughs like Waltham Forest have brought in measures to prevent through traffic on residential roads. Streets outside some schools are closed to cars at pick-up and drop-off times. And of course, Transport for London is expanding the ultra-low emissions zone. But this is only the start. Going car-free made me and my family happier, more active, and changed our experience of London for the better. Let's make it easier for people to make better transport choices, to get around on accessible public transport, walking, cycling, scooting, or using mobility aids. It's also about justice. Londoners who live in tower blocks and poorer areas are far less likely to own a car. It's not fair that they suffer the most of other people driving through their streets. By replacing parking spaces with parklets like this, we can create spaces for people to socialise and rest. I'm a Londoner myself, and I'm looking forward to working with residents, communities and businesses to reimagine our neighbourhoods. For example, could we design creative new uses for the soon-to-be redundant petrol stations? I want to collaborate with people whose voices are often ignored, to enable our kids to travel to school safely, to play outside more, and to design spaces where neighbours can get to know each other. Let's work together to make this happen.
There we go. Over to you, Carolyn. Looked pretty good to me.
Thanks. That was good we were able to get that to work in the end. So it would be good if I could come along to these on a sort of regular basis to update people about the campaign and try not to overload you with too much information this evening. But basically, possible for those who don't know us, we're a climate action charity, formerly 1010 Climate Action, working in different areas, such as basically working on the premise of like trying to change the way people eat, travel, consume, etc. So obviously this comes under transport. It is a national charity, but the Car Free Cities campaign is conceived as a kind of grassroots campaign where we've got 4 campaigners working in different areas: Bristol, Birmingham, Leeds and myself in London. And we're trying to sort of engage communities in actions that will actually create these kind of interventions that will help to put pressure on politicians to accelerate that change. We're not trying to do away with cars altogether, but we're trying to move away from, sort of accelerate that move towards other forms of transport where cars, it's more about, car clubs and sort of shared ownership and less dependency on private car use. And the main elements of the campaign for this year, next year's not sort of planned yet, are around traffic filter survey, parklets, repurposed petrol stations and car-free living, and that's a piece of work to kind of support the introduction of the clean air zones in the different cities. So the traffic filter survey that is actually, sort of already started. Always looking for more volunteers. We're struggling a bit to get volunteers for this because it's July and people have got other things to do. So if you're in any of those cities, you'd like to volunteer or spread the word, that would be great. So what we're doing is we are going round to not the new low traffic neighbourhoods that are causing all the hoo-ha, but the old ones that have been there for decades that nobody really pays any attention to, and conducting a door-to-door survey to find out if people would rather have those filters taken out to allow the traffic to flow back down the road, or if they'd rather keep them. And we'll be publishing the data from that in the autumn. Parklets, so far we've got a design your own parklet tool that we released on Clean Air Day. I can share a link to that along with links to all the other stuff and the video. And we're going to be starting a fundraising drive for parklets next week with a plotter that we've created, which is a map that layers levels of deprivation and access to green space and car ownership. So basically showing where the areas are that we need parklets the most. And that is something I was hoping to get a bit of feedback from on you guys around. I know Edith, if I'm pronouncing her name right, from Islington is on here from the London Parklet campaign. We're working closely with them as well. But I suppose my question is, what would need to happen for the councils where you've got political support for parklets to actually translate that into permission from a highways department to set up a community parklet? Because that's something we're exploring at the moment. I'm discovering that even in areas where there is political support, there are issues with you know, the highways department only want it if they're doing it themselves because they're worried about, you know, ongoing issues maybe around maintenance or I don't know, there seems to be some sort of bureaucracy there that I don't really know much about planning, so any feedback on how we might overcome that or what those obstacles might be would be great. And then the other two elements, the petrol stations one, it'd be great to get any kind of initial responses to that, but I'd like to come back and present when I've got a clearer, more fully developed plan. But the idea there, is basically working with communities to design new uses for petrol stations. So first of all, raising in the public consciousness, you know, the awareness that there's going to be this land up for grabs in a few years as petrol cars are phased out. What's going to happen to it? Is it just going to become more land for housing? Is it just going to become places like car washes and electric vehicle charging points? Or can we actually work with some communities to design some new uses for those? So we've got some kind of co-design workshops with communities planned and a drawing competition in schools as part of the big draw in October. And what we'd love to do is actually work with some community groups to register some specific petrol stations as assets of community value. But there are lots of questions in there for that bit of the campaign. And again, if anybody knows, are there sort of planning restrictions on, you know, what are the sort of planning regulations around petrol stations and converting their use and remediation? It's something that our in-house transport planner will be doing some research on when he's got time. And then the car-free living programme, that's still being developed for the autumn, but in London I'm hoping to do some trials for adapted bikes and cargo bikes to support more families and disabled people to give cycling a go. We're not sure yet if that'll be sort of pledge, getting people to pledge trying out being car-free or doing it more as a research, so kind of choosing a few people to follow and then finding out how they get on and what are the obstacles that they come across in trying to go car-free. And then last of all, I'm also developing a diverse image library to try and address the fact that we don't see enough representation of different ethnic groups, disability. Like whenever I see anything about disability in cycling, it's normally Isabel from Wheels for Wellbeing. And there's always an issue around permissions and people trying to kind of grab photos last minute. Obviously, if you're publishing something, you've got to make sure you've got permission there. So we're setting up an image library there, and I will circulate the link. If anybody's got pictures that they are happy for other people to use, and it's a very quick form to upload them, then that would be fantastic. Doesn't even need to be diverse images, to be honest, just images that we've got permission for with people in them. And that is going to be a library that we'll be happy to share with everybody within the sector, not just for Possible. Yeah, I'm glad that people are saying that would be useful because there does seem to be a bit of an issue there. I think that's it for now. If anybody's got any feedback about the sort of planning aspects around parklets and permissions, and also around the petrol stations, then I'd be really glad to hear that. And I'll put the link in the chat for the diverse image library if anybody's got anything to add there.
Definitely, there's people here who'll definitely help you, and yeah, you're more than welcome back anytime you want to keep us posted. And everything. It all sounds really good, positive stuff. I'll move
Thank
on
you,
now,
Brian.
By all means, use the chat and get out. I know there's several people here who can help you on all those things. Should we move on then? Sorry to hush everybody along this week, but you know what we're like. So yeah, just keep the comments in the chat and we'll try and have a little bit of time at the moment. But
great. Thank you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks for talking. Brilliant to have you. Pearl, you good to go?
Yeah, I'm good.
Yeah, all yours.
Cool. Can you see that?
Yeah. Yeah, you might want to make it full screen. But...
Okay, thank you, Brian, for inviting us. Me and Sylvia, who's going to jump in whenever, we're both trustees of the London Cycling Campaign, and we're the co-chairs of the Policy Forum, which is actually a subcommittee of the board, but it's open to the public. So the purpose of that is to try and get more people involved in LCC policymaking and policy in general. We recently published a literature review of best practice in micromobility parking. We got a volunteer researcher, Toby Godfrey, to write the bulk of it. And then me and Sylvia and Tom, who works for LCC, and the other policy forum members, Neil and Anthony, we all edited it. And it was kind of meant to be a conversation starter, not a finished article. So we thought we'd hold an event to start some conversation, and people can share any ideas, information, opinions that they had, so this was this morning. We timed it to happen just after the London e-scooter trials and hoped that people would kind of have opinions about those. But I'm not sure how much that came up actually. So I was just going to do a little kind of summary of what that happened. This is how it went. What we kind of went through in that workshop this morning. But I also just want to say, none of us get paid for this. We're all, well, Tom gets paid, but we're all volunteers. And I think sometimes we don't, I mean, some of us do work in transport here, but sometimes we forget that there are just enthusiasts here as well, campaigners who have actual jobs as well outside of this. I know some of us are here for work. But yeah, so that's why it's not, you know, it wasn't a paid for report. So this is some of our conclusions from the report, which I would recommend that you go and read. It's very interesting. And this is kind of what I'll start kind of at the end. This is what we ended up kind of concluding from the workshop, is that we need to share knowledge more. We need to share case studies and good practice. We kind of as a sector, as a campaign, need to consult better. We need to have accessibility and inclusivity at the heart of everything, from design to locations. So it was a very wide-ranging workshop. We did a lot of small group stuff, but we also did these word clouds, which the whole group participated in. So I just thought we could have a little look at these quickly. This one is, what aspects of micromobility parking are you most confident on? So that's some of the stuff that people said. So there's a lot there. Unfortunately, you need to pay to get it out as a CSV, and I haven't done that analysis yet myself. And then we also asked, what aspects of micromobility parking are you least sure about how to get right? And that's the kind of thing that people said. Planning, visual appearance, parking enforcement, inclusion was a big one. And then we also asked, what's the biggest challenge for you on micromobility parking? And they said things like this, and this was at the end. So I just thought that gave a kind of overview of where people were at. We had a lot of different people come, like TfL people, transport consultants, manufacturers, operators, campaigners. Wish we had a few more campaigners, to be honest. Sylvia, is there anything else you wanted to say?
Yeah, thank you, Phil. No, I thought it was a really good, productive meeting. And yeah, I think what transpires really is because it's all emerging and we still don't really know, you know, what's going to come next. So there's a real need to have the basics right. And in terms of, because there's so many, like, for instance, if you look at institutions like hospitals, you know, their main job is not really to think about those things. So it would be really easy for the people who deal with that to have something ready to use with the basics. So the basics are that it needs to be inclusive and secure, accessible. So, you know, not somewhere at the back, which is really difficult to find. And it really needs to be completely integrated with the thinking when you put forward those kind of proposals. There's quite a lot, I think, that's going to come out in the future, because it keeps changing. We don't know what we're going to have next, you know, in a few years. And there was some really, I mean, the technology I think will play a crucial role in all this, especially with the safety and security aspect to prevent thefts and things like that. But yeah, we do encourage you to read the reports. It's really good researchy. The researcher really looked at everything that was existing, so that's great. Thank you.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Phil and Sylvia. Definitely, you definitely bang out the decent reports in that policy forum group, and glad you reminded us all that you're doing this just for fun. Imagine if you were a professional. Oh, no, amazing work again. Yeah, we've got a lot to go through. So any particular questions, let's stick them in the chat there. That's all right. But I'll just thank both the speakers at this stage. Trying to cram in a lot this week. But yeah, great work, and I can't wait to see what you do next. Come and tell us about it.
Thank you. Cheers.
And I'm glad it went well today as well. All right, yeah. So we'll move on to Martin from Cycle Street's hero of cycle data. Are you there, Martin? Oh, look at that.
I am.
Speed of share. We've got a technical person coming on. I'll leave it to you, Martin.
Hey everyone, so I'm Martin from Cycle Streets, and my colleague Simon is here as well. He's done a lot of the work on this. We've basically been working on a project over the last few months on mapping modal filters and low traffic neighbourhoods more generally, because there's really very little data. And so just very briefly, just to give a quick introduction to who we are. So Cycle Streets, we're a social enterprise based in Cambridge. We're best known for doing sort of cycle journey planning. I think we're one of the earliest out there. And if you've used tools like Citymapper or PCT, Propensity to Cycle, you'll have used our stuff basically. We're embedded within those. We, as well as journey planning, we do various sort of tools for advocacy. And we're also one of the earliest users of OpenStreetMap. So modal filters and LTN. So basically, we come from a campaigning background. I actually live in an LTN that's existed since the 1980s. And basically, there's no national data on where they are. And yet they come across in the media as something that's radical or new. And yet, as campaigners, you know, we know that they've existed for decades. So we wanted to demonstrate really that they are very common by actually getting really some solid data on this. Partly to help people create new, who are creating new LTNs, to kind of back them up to say, well, look, you know, you know, you're anti-people, you're saying they're radical, but no, they're everywhere. And also we wanted to make sure that some data that can be used for socioeconomic correlations and research generally, because that's obviously one of the criticisms that some people have raised. So we set out to map for the first time, we believe, firstly, where modal filters are. So you can see on the left, just a quick preview. I'll give a live demo and you'll all have access shortly. Showing where modal filters are of various kinds, bollards, gates, and so on. And secondly, to work out which streets are through streets, so whether you can run through them or not, or indeed whether there's traffic coming. So modal filters, which is the first one. So the first thing is there's no real definition of exactly what a modal filter is. There's no sort of dictionary definition. And so we've tried to basically categorize them into various types. And we've tried to be as honest with ourselves as possible as to what really is a modal filter and what's not. And we think there are sort of 5 sort of main types. You've got bollards and gates, gaps, cycleway filters, so things like no entry except cycles, which prevent you cycling into an area, and various bus gates. So let's just look at some of these, just so we're all clear exactly what they are. So here's the sort of typical bollards thing. I should just apologise, most of these are from Cambridge where I live. We've actually got lots of them and they've been around for decades, so but these do sort of prove the point that they're not a new thing. So we've got bollards, where you've just got bollards in the middle of a street to physically divide the street into 2 parts for motorists, but not for cyclists and walkers, people cycling walking. You've got gates. So this is one very near where I live from the 1980s. Obviously now it'd probably be better. It's not the most accessible one. We actually get queues to get through this, being in Cambridge where there's lots of people cycling. So we've got a gate. We've got various gaps. So where you've got some sort of blockage, but there's obviously a gap for cycling and walking. Sometimes obviously these are in conjunction with bollards. Here's another gap. This is actually a crossroad. So essentially the crossroads has been divided into 2. So thank you to Ramsey Hyman for that one. And then we have cycleway filters. So here you have the traditional sort of the pre-2010, is it, DFT arrangement for no entry except cycles. a plug where basically a cyclist can obviously go through on the left. And of course, what that does is stops vehicles going through those. And in many cases, these obviously were created to create modal filters. And then we've also got this sort of more modern arrangement, which is the same sort of principle, but which is just a simpler sign at the no intercept cycles, which has exactly the same effect. But they're represented in map data quite differently. So we have to treat them as slightly different things. Then we also have bus gates. So this is one in Cambridge. Obviously, these tend to be more sort of city centre type focused. We're not covering bus lanes alongside roads where there's a road as well. This is strictly a bus gate that only a bus can go through, a point filter basically, along with obviously cyclists and perhaps taxis. Excuse me. And then there's what we call continuations. There isn't, as far as we know, any technical term for this, so we've invented one. This is where my colleague Simon came up with this term, and it's basically where you have a local street that almost joins a road, and there's a continuation that sort of is the bit that continues from that side street to the main road in the form of some sort of pedestrian pavement or a cycleway. So this one I think technically is cyclable because there's no cycling sign or anything, so you can cycle across that. This is actually from South Shields, my holiday last year, a little holiday snap with a nice decorative bollards there. And continuation, so here's a rather grottier picture, but it's a rather grotty continuation. This is from Cambridge. This is where it's only walkable technically. It's obviously not at all very accessible, but nonetheless it is you can clearly see it's been sort of cut off from this main road. And that's probably from the 1980s. But here's another slightly more modern one, which is I think Waltham Forest, I think, unless I'm wrong, which is not just a continuation, but actually really has become a really nice sort of public space. So we've got this whole range of modal filters, and I think that sort of broadly covers most of what there are. And so what we've done is basically analysed OpenStreetMap and turned them into a map, which we'll just have a look at in a moment. So here's just a screenshot from Newcastle, for example, and you can see on the left we've got the sort of colour code as to what they are. You can see obviously lots of gaps alongside roads and in the middle of streets and so on. And we'll have a look at this in a moment. I just want to say briefly how this works. What we do is we define particular sort of street patterns. So if you imagine you've got some sort of gap in the middle of a road, essentially on a map that's represented as a residential street, or rather two bits of residential street with a tiny little bit of cycleway between them. And so what we've done is to convert these into diagrams as sort of points and lines that sort of join up. And we then try to express that diagram representing how it's laid out as a piece of database code, which then searches the map, and we then search the map for all the sort of matches. So just to give a very quick example of methodologically. So this is the plug case where you have a main road going left to right here, and then there's the side street. And so we've represented this as the main road along along here. We have a side road which we draw in as these dotted lines, and you can see that they meet at a certain point, and this bit is a one-way. So you can see there's some arrows there, and there's a sort of there's a cycleway that kind of goes round. And so the features of this are that basically the side street has to join the main road at a certain point. The bit from the side road has to be one way, and coming out of that, there is a cycleway that joins from that point to the side road. So we can represent that in this rather complicated code, but nonetheless, it's a sort of pattern matching exercise that takes OpenStreetMap data and sort of finds how these things are all connected together. And then that just runs overnight and it generates the data. So that's sort of modal filters, and we'll have a look at the map in a moment. I'll give you some good examples from Cambridge. So on the left here, we've got the modal filters, but what we've also done is to look at the rat runability of streets, which actually to us is, we actually sort of started on this, but it seems that people are actually more interested in the modal filters. But so the streets one, what we've done is basically work out every street, whether there is potential rat running from one main road to another. And where that's the case, we colour it red. So you can see here at the top, there's sort of a rat run basically from this main street here through to that one along what's called New Street. And then places that aren't through traffic, we've coloured this sort of greeny blue. So the sort of red and green, or blue rather. And then there's also a darker red, so a brownish colour where it is a rat run, or it's rat runnable, but there's traffic calming. And so this is the result, for example, in Cambridge, near where I live. There's basically, so here there is, this is clearly this is essentially an LTN from the 1980s, if you like. And at this point, these 2 points here, there's basically some modal filters. And the interesting thing, of course, is that a modal filter that even is down here actually is the cause of why all these streets up here are green. In other words, they have a very wide, they can have a very wide effect if they're strategically placed in the right place. And so again, we've covered the whole of the country with this, and we've more work to do on this. It's not quite as robust as we'd like yet, but it's very strongly getting there. You can see this area on the other side, Romsey, where my colleague Simon lives. There's potential rat running through here, but actually these have got quite a lot of traffic calming. So you can probably just about see these are sort of brown rather than red in most of these. So just very quickly to give a brief description of how this works. If we look at the first picture, what we've done is to basically divide up the city, basically find the main roads and things like the railway or the river and so on. And so what you end up with is these sort of residential areas that are the spaces between the main roads. And so you can see here in the second picture, we've got the sort of surrounding main street, the main roads. We've got Mill Road, East Road, Newmarket Road, Coldham's Lane. And the question is, can you, for example, is there any way to get from any point on Mill Road to any point on East Road? So for example, can you get from 1 to 10, 1 to 11, 1 to 12, and all the combinations and so on. And we've got down here, for example, 1, 2, and 3. You can sort of go in, but you can't sort of go through. You can just come back out, and so that gets eliminated. We're not treating a rat run as going from one bit of a main road to another. Although in London there is some cases of that which we can discuss later. And so what we find, in fact, in this case, is that the only place that you can really cut through is basically along here, this bit in blue at the top. And so we then basically extract those ones that have had cars routing over them. So we've basically built a mini car routing engine to say, can you drive from one to the other without running into some sort of physical blockage? And so the ones that are possible to drive are shown in blue here. And so we then keep those and then colour them accordingly. So red for rat runnable and the greenish blue for others. Just a brief bit before I give a very quick demo, and then some questions slightly run out of time. The data we comes from OpenStreetMap, but we've done a lot of analysis on top of that. It covers all of the UK and Ireland. There's a beta online map, which I'll give you the password to in a sec. There's also a public data interface, so the data could be extracted to GIS systems, and we are planning GIS downloads and statistics by Highway Authority. We'd like to also do wards, perhaps. And we've also included feedback buttons, so you can actually say that it's wrongly picked up something or it's missed something out. There's been some initial media coverage in The Guardian, you probably saw with Adam trying to bike his best a few weeks ago. So lastly, just to say the next steps, we want to get as much feedback from as possible. We'd love each of you to really look around your area and use the feedback system to mark where there are any issues. We're obviously seeking funding to develop the analysis a bit more, to add more complex street patterns and so on. And we think the impact this will have is that, firstly, we believe this proves that they are widespread indeed. It backs up local work that all of us are doing. We believe it'll provide an evidence base to link to social demographic effects. And we'll also be using it to improve the quality of our own bike routing. And so here is the map. Is this showing okay? Yeah,
you're all good.
So I will just put in the chat, if I can open the chat, the link, just so people can also try it themselves in a sec. So we've got a browsable map. As I say, it covers everywhere. It will only ever show 2,000 modal filters at once, so you might need to just zoom in a bit to get them. But so let's just go into, for example, Cambridge. I'll just sorry, the legend seems to have disappeared for some reason. So we've got these various different types. So here, let's look at, black is a gap, for example. So here we've got, there we are, there's a gate. You can tell it's pretty grotty these days, but from the 1980s. We've got things like known set cycles, cases, so Stopcost Street. In fact, there's the one I just showed you before. Got bus gates. So we've got the new Mill Road bus gates, which with any luck may be made permanent soon, but we'll see. Obviously, Google Street View is sometimes a little bit out of date, so they're not always on there. So that's the mode of filters one, and we can obviously browse around and have a look at those. We tried to deduplicate things. So often you have a mode of filter that, for example, includes obviously bollards or gates as part of that. We've avoided that showing up as sort of multiple things. So that's the mode of filter side, and you can obviously browse around that. And then we've also got the LTNs, the streets rather. And so again, you've got the colorings of each type. There's the key on the left-hand side. So if I just switch them both on, you can see there's obviously a correlation. So here are the ones that we just talked about. The mode of filters in the middle of this area, which really calms this whole zone, as it were. Down here in New Street in Cambridge, this was actually a scheme that was done under the tranche 1, I think. And you can see here, even Google Street View is caught up. There's a newly added, not very attractive, thank you very much, Cambridge County Council, but nonetheless a not very attractive LTN. And that's basically turned this whole area from red to green, because this here is the station, this is in town, and basically these two main roads here are the main routes. And so there was a lot of taxi running along here, and it suddenly calmed that area. So yeah, so that's basically what we've got, and I look forward to your questions. Let me just put the first of all, I've just firstly provide just in the chat a technical description of the different modal filters. We're going to publish a blog post soon, and we've also just met with Rachel Aldridge, who we're hoping to create a combined peer review paper on, because this is obviously very novel research, basically. I will just give you the link, which is ltns.cyclestreets.net. Just a sec, just paste that in. And you will need this password. At the moment, this is what we call a sort of a closed beta at the moment. We're obviously conscious that this is a controversial area, and we want to make sure that the data is as good as possible before being made fully public. So we're very keen that practitioners, such as everyone in this room, basically, a virtual room, can try it out and give feedback. And as I say, you can give feedback quite easily. So for example, if you saw one that isn't a mode of filter, you can basically click on, let's just get to the mode of filters one. You can click on the area, you can click on it, and you can say it's not a mode of filter, and then just basically give us a quick note. Or if there's one that that's missing, so for example, in fact, there is one here, and I know why it's missing, it's because it's a very complicated street pattern we haven't quite got right. You can actually right click on the map, and if my interface was slightly better, you could actually say, well, what type of choose cycles, and give your, and that will come through to us, and we will review those, and then we can basically whitelist those into the map. Yes, or reject if they're on, but we obviously so we're very keen to get people to really look at their areas and to spend a bit of time, if you can, really just scrutinizing what's there and giving and working through and finding any issues. I also just put our email address to just in there, so but do give it a try. But yeah, let's have some questions. I think that's about 15 minutes, so
yeah,
bit of time.
I've still got another speaker, so I'm going to keep.
Oh, sorry.
Let
okay.
someone come in, but like, yeah, I just wanted to say it's totally awesome. And I'm sure everybody just wants to run off and start playing with that now. But I'm going to get you to hold on for another.
Yes.
But I will allow one to come in, because I've got to, because it's Mark Strong, and he has got a definition of modal filters, which I'd love him to share, to go back to the start of your thing, and then if we can do the rest of the chats for Martin in the chat, and maybe we can go back to this as well in a few weeks as well when we do the full launch, because it was brilliant, that, Martin. Go on, Mark.
Thanks. So we did a piece of work exactly like this, except very focused, for drumroll Hackney, of all places, December 2019, and we actually did what Martin has done, but we did it in person, and we looked at, we'd had the benefit of having done a cycle skills audit, so we'd cycled all around Hackney, so we defined some things. We'd also got the OpenStreetMap data for Hackney, and we also got, in London, we got the cycle infrastructure database. So we had all three sources, and they didn't match. So we were asked, Hackney asked us to go and find out where their filters really were. We didn't have the benefit of all the computer power. So we first of all came up with a definition. Steve Melia invented the term, by the way, modal filter, University of West of England. So you've got to thank him for the definition. And there's a paper. But we combined all the definitions, and I'll read out what I wrote. we said a filter is a physical or virtual feature which applies either permanently or for part of the day to restrict use of a highway which was formerly available to all modes of traffic, to cycles, buses, pedestrians, or a combination. And the reason for that is things like a park, which have always been there, are they a filter if you can cycle through them? They're not really. So we had to try and find out things that were a road and aren't a road anymore. And I'll just say in Hackney, we looked at it and it was quite relevant to what happened this morning with the Healthy Streets scorecard, because in the first edition of that, they used, quote, filters as one of their criteria. And the filters they used were actually barriers in the cycle infrastructure database, which were just barriers. They weren't actually filters. Yeah. So I noticed that they weren't actually it wasn't in the Healthy scorecard this morning. They've replaced it with, I think, LTNs now. So they've moved on. But we found that a lot of the filters in OSM that were apparently filters weren't. They were just bollards that weren't filters. Yeah, exactly. And you had to put all three things together, and then you had to finally go and look at them. And I think, you know, much as I love AI and algorithmic stuff, I think that's what you're asking for as well. There's no substitute for going and having a human eyes look at it.
So just answering that, yeah. So what we've done is, as you say, one of the problems in OpenStreetMap is that there's lots of bollards and things all over the place, but most of them are not actually modal filters. They're things like bollards on pavements and stuff like that. So what we've actually specifically done is actually analyze those that are actually modal filters, and rather than just anything that's a bollard. I'm sure, you know, there may be odd cases that are wrong, and obviously that's what the feedback's for. But yeah, we've actually tried to really, you know, to say, you know, what are the overall conditions for that? For example, that they're part of a street, that they're within a certain length of the space, et cetera, et cetera. Also, I would say if anyone does have any data sets like you have, it would be very, very useful for us to get a copy, because that would enable us to do a proper check in terms of making you know, if there's a good reference data set, we can actually do validation. But I think, Mark, we've gone a lot further than I think what perhaps you were just suggesting there. It's not just.
Well, let's talk about it offline sometime.
It's definitely way. Yeah, it's way
from our side of it. Go on, Martin. I'll let you say the last.
I just say it's way more than literally just sort of saying, you know, where are bollards in OSN. It's way more than that. So yeah, but yeah, thank you.
Well, I thought it was awesome, and I know like Graham Cooper and Shan Wilkinson have done Bolton. So yeah, you already got Bolton North done. All right, yeah, that's totally brilliant. And hopefully, when we've all played with it, like, it'll come back and we can have a proper session on it of all our pedantic comments. But yeah, really good. I go on to our last speaker now. Sorry, it's been a rocket roller coaster ride of talks, and it's been brilliant this week. And here's a man who'll finish it all off perfectly. Roger Geffen, come on in.
All right, thank you. And well, wow, follow Martin Lucas Smith. That's always a challenge. Well done, man. And yes, it's been really good set of talks. I'll cut out some of what I was going to do just for sheer brevity of time. I will attempt. I'll see how far I get on. I'll drop things as I go. Partly to just sort of outline what it is that Cycling UK and various allies have been calling for in the police and so on bill. And you know, some of it is going to be a bit of the history of the inglorious history of attempts to reform road traffic law and road traffic offences and penalties. Some of it's going to be what we've been calling for. Some of it's been what's been going on during the passing of the bill so far, and a bit of what happens next. I'm not sure how much of that I'll actually get to do, but let's make a start and see how we get on. You'll doubtless be aware that Cycling UK and allies such as Road Peace, Road Danger Reduction Forum, as in Bob's organisation, Road Peace, Living Streets, so the whole little gaggle of us have been concerned for quite a while that road traffic offences and penalties do not create safe streets, do not provide justice for road crash victims. Basically, the whole system of road traffic law is and offences and penalties is really not fit for purpose. We've been banging on about this for many years and years. We launched, Cycling UK launched a road justice campaign. There had been a predecessor campaign called Stop Smidsy. Smidsy stood for Sorry Mate, I Didn't See You, but we kind of renamed it as Road Justice. That did end up being easier for people to understand. And one consequence of that campaign is we did manage to press the Ministry of Justice when Chris Grayling was Justice Secretary, remember him? Back in 2014, he promised a comprehensive review of road traffic offences and penalties. That review then didn't happen. Instead, the government conducted a much more limited consultation on just 3 amendments to the legal framework, 2 of which will, I've grabbed headlines, but will actually make very little difference in a very small number of cases, and 1 of which might be counterproductive. Those changes, the 2 changes that we can sort of welcome, even though they're going to have very limited effect, are increasing the maximum penalties for causing death by dangerous driving from 14 years to life, and similarly increasing from 14 years to life for causing death by so-called careless driving while under the influence of drink and drugs. Those are obviously headline grabbing cases, and it gives the media and politicians an opportunity to say they're getting tough on the very worst motoring offenders, but they do nothing to deal with the, if you like, the run-of-the-mill fatal offences, if I can call them that. And I know, and it's very obvious the dilemma in that the very phrase that I'm using there. The government's 3rd proposal was to introduce a new offence causing serious injury by careless driving, and I'm going to spend a bit of time on this distinction between careless and dangerous driving, because that is one of the 5 things that we have identified as things that we need to reform. So anyway, those were the 3 things that the government decided to do consulted on in 2017. We said at the time that that we'd still need that for road traffic offences, that full review of road traffic offences and penalties, and we're still saying it 7 years later. So when those 3 things, we've been waiting for those 3 things to happen so that we could add in a whole load more amendments. And back in February this year, the government was saying that this legislation would come through in the autumn. Then all of a sudden, in March, they published this whopper of bill, over 300 pages, that took everybody by surprise. We knew that the government had said that they were going to legislate to criminalise intentional trespass, which is basically let's go at travellers and gypsies. We had no idea, nobody had any idea they were effectively going to criminalise all sorts of forms of peaceful protest, and that they were going to chuck these 3 little offences into that whopper of bill, thereby forcing Labour MPs who had campaigned for some of those offences, the increasing the maximum sentences for causing death by dangerous driving. Therefore, they were basically defying some Labour MPs to vote against something that they'd campaigned for. It's petty politics. But here we were, trying to get attention to the definition of dangerous and careless driving and maximum sentences and penalties for hit and run offences and for car dooring offences, and making sure that driving bans stick in a bill that MPs were talking about protest rights and travellers' rights, and rape victims and pet theft, and goodness knows how much else is in this bill. So it's been really hard to get a voice for the issues we've been trying to raise. Nonetheless, we did manage to, Lynn Greenwood, former chair of the and still a member of the Transport Select Committee, raised them in the 2nd reading debate, which is the first real debate in the Commons. And then the bill basically just was raced through. The government had originally tried to race the whole bill through before anyone noticed. And then, of course, there was the Sarah Everard incident on Clapham Common, which meant that their plans to rush the bill through without anyone noticing, well, it all got noticed, but as I say, it got noticed for all sorts of reasons, other than the bits that we, Cycling UK and our allies, were interested in, namely Part 5 of the bill. All the attention was going on Parts 3 and 4, the protests and the trespass clauses. So, anyway, we published a booklet which identified those 5 issues that I just touched on. Let's just really quickly try and deal with each of them. Careless and dangerous driving. This is a really thorny issue. I will try and explain it really quickly. I'll probably fail. The pitfall is that, well, once upon a time there was a clear distinction between what was called careless and reckless driving, and in that context, carelessness or recklessness were states of mind, and it's fairly easy from common parlance to understand what careless driving meant. The difficulty, that was the legal framework up to 1991. The difficulty with it was that although it was intuitively sensible, it was very difficult to prove a reckless state of mind to the criminals to the standard required in a criminal court, namely beyond reasonable doubt. So there were some legal reforms passed in 1991 that replaced recklessness with dangerous driving.
where dangerous driving was supposed to have nothing to do with the state of mind of the driver. It was merely supposed to be about whether the driving caused danger that would have been obvious to a careful and competent driver. So it's very hard to imagine, if you really take that to heart, how would you kill somebody by driving in a way that had not caused danger that should have been obvious to a careful and competent driver? I have thought of examples. You really have to stretch your imagination and think of some fairly convoluted scenarios to think of how you could cause death by careless driving. However, in 2006, the government passed some new legislation to introduce the new offence of causing death by careless driving, and lo and behold, the number of prosecutions and convictions for causing death by dangerous driving nosedived, even though the legal distinction between careless and dangerous had not changed in the slightest. And even now, we're still struggling with this. You can still, even now, you can still see regional disparities between what is the ratio in different parts of the country between the numbers of prosecutions and convictions for careless and dangerous driving. Surely that demonstrates that there is a lack of legal clarity or lack of understanding among magistrates and particularly jurors as to what the distinction is actually supposed to be. So we've long argued that this needs to be clarified and there are different ways in which we could clarify it. But if the government wants to stick with an objective distinction, as in it relates to the standard of the driving rather than the state of the mind of the driver, we reckon that probably the best way to do this would be to relate it either to the highway code or to the driving test. So we propose that careless driving should be driving that would be a breach of the highway code that makes a material difference, i.e. not merely a technical difference, driving on the wrong side of the road late at night when nobody cares, or on a country lane where there's no traffic and nobody cares, but it forces, it causes someone to have to take avoiding action or puts them in danger. Dangerous driving actually is dangerous driving, which would get you an automatic fail in your driving test. So there's some objectivity to these things, rather than is dangerous driving that falls below or far below the standard of a careful and competent driver, which is the sort of wording we've got in the law at the moment. And of course, it causes huge amounts of confusion. What is below, what is far below, and what is the standard of a careful and competent driver anyway? Is it a typical juror, or is it a driver who never drives carelessly? After all, careless driving is driving that falls below a standard of a careful and competent driver. So surely a careful and competent driver is a notional driver who never drives carelessly. You can see what I mean about what a can of worms this distinction is, and it needs tidying up, and it's needed tidying up for a very, very long time. However, alongside that, we've needed to make it clear that just because we want this clarified, that does not mean we want a lot more drivers to be locked up for a long time for a moment of what in common parlance would be classed as carelessness. What we want is, in most of those sort of cases, greater use of driving bans to take the driver who has driven carelessly for a moment and possibly caused death or serious injury, and therefore should be taken off the road for public protection, but they're not a dangerous person such that you need to lock them up for public protection. Locking them up should be for those who have, in the old terminology, driven recklessly, or who are repeat offenders, particularly those who repeatedly flout driving bans. So much greater emphasis on driving bans rather than necessarily relying on prison sentences, because the idea that a driver who has driven in a way that a jury thinks, I could have done that, I don't want to send that person to prison. And that's probably one of the reasons why jurors are reluctant to convict for dangerous driving in the first place. So greater reliance on driving bans would provide public protection, but it would probably make the whole of the rest of the legal framework work better. So that was our second amendment. So clarify careless and dangerous, make sure that driving bans are a much more important part of the framework. Then the third thing we wanted, which follows on from that, is if we're going to use driving bans, they've got to stick. And that means we've got to close what is known as the exceptional hardship loophole. This is the loophole where drivers routinely plead to the courts that they should be exempted from a driving ban, whether it's for 12 points or any other conviction, on the grounds that this would cause, quote, exceptional hardship. They plead it so routinely that it's made a complete mockery of the word exceptional. So one of our amendments was to provide a definition of exceptional for this purpose. Let's just, to exemplify why this is needed, let me just cite the case of Christopher Card. He was using his mobile phone, driving along the A31, not noticing that he'd overtaken a whole bunch of time trialing cyclists on the A31 until he crashed into one of them, Lee Martin, causing his death. This was the 9th time he had been caught using a mobile phone. On 2 previous occasions, he'd been sent on a driver retraining course. On 6 occasions, he'd been convicted and had pleaded exceptional hardship. If only the courts had actually banned him from driving on one of those previous offences, then Lee Martin's family would have been saved a much greater exceptional hardship. Surely that needs to be part of the law. There is now a petition on the government website which has attracted over 100,000 signatures. That should have triggered a parliamentary debate. It still hasn't happened yet, and the government still hasn't acted. Good news is that we have now learned that ministers behind the scenes are minded to do something about at least that element of what we're calling for. But for goodness sakes, there's so many other things that need fixing, as well as the exceptional hardship. Another one on our list is hit and run offences. This again is huge number of cases where drivers do hit and run, and yet the penalties for hitting and running are effectively suitable for what happens if you leave the scene having scratched somebody else's parked car, not leaving someone for dead on the side of the road. This is what happens to Sean Morley, a 20-year-old student who was knocked over by a driver while crossing the road on his way home from a night out with his mates. He probably took 2 or 3 hours to die. If the driver had stopped and reported him, his life might have been saved. Instead, he was found by a lorry driver the following morning. However, there was no evidence. The driver handed himself in and was found to have alcohol in his drugs in his system, but no one could prove whether he'd had alcohol or drugs in his system at the time of the collision, or therefore whether he had driven carelessly or dangerously, in causing the death. So he was only convicted of the hit and run offence, not for any other driving offence, because there was no evidence, and he therefore got a 16-week sentence and a 12-month driving ban. And there have been other cases like that. That too surely needs to be addressed. One other issue we picked up, sentences for car dooring. Again, car dooring, it's an offence that carries a fairly trivial sentence, which do not reflect the fact that this too can be fatal. We found out from FOI requests that this was some years ago, we found this out, between 2011 and 2015, there were over 3,000 people were injured in collisions where vehicle door opened or closed negligently, was recorded as a criminal contributory factor. 8 of those were fatal injuries. 5 of those fatalities were cyclists. They include Sean Harding, Sam Harding, Sam Bolton, and Robert Hamilton. In several of those cases, prosecutors tried to go for things like manslaughter because they felt that the penalties for simply car dooring were woefully inadequate. They've consistently failed. And again, this is one of the many ways in which the legal framework leaves bereaved, seriously injured or bereaved victims seriously dismayed. So the bill got rushed into Parliament. It's rushed through. It was voted through last night. I had hoped that I'd be doing this talk at a point where it was still an opportunity to send you out and contact your MPs. Though the bill got its 3rd reading last night, and all the protest clauses and everything else has just sailed through with very, very few amendments. Certainly none to the bits that we wanted. Ben Bradshaw did raise 2 of our issues, the exceptional large hardship loophole and hit and run during the 3rd reading debate last night. Spoke really, really well. Thank you, Ben Bradshaw. I am much more confident that we will have time to raise a cross-party coalition in the Lords. We just got a bit more time to do this stuff. In the meantime, it is still worth getting your MPs to write to the ministers to keep up that pressure on them, because actually business is much more likely to be done in the Lords. For all that this is a Home Office and Ministry of Justice bill, this is transport legislation that we're concerned about. And the Transport Minister in the Lords is also directly responsible for road safety. This is Baroness Fear. She's actually a very sensible minister. And we still, I think, have a chance of making some things stick. It's been really important that we just got those 2 MPs to raise those issues in the hurly-burly of a much bigger bill that had an awful lot more going on it. But fingers crossed, we will still get somewhere. And if we can at least press for one or two of those issues to get amended right now, and more importantly, we can secure that ministerial commitment to do the on the Hansard record to do what ministers promised back in 2014, will have made some progress. But goodness me, this is one of those long run fights. Thank you.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks on all our behalf. I'm echoing the applause. It's amazing the work you've done and all over the. If ever there was like an LBE well deserved, it's yours, Roger. So cheers for that. What an amazing show this has been. I'll never take a week off again. It's too good. Well, I'll just pass over to Ruth now to do a last word. And we're actually on time. And Roger, I could have listened to you for another hour and a half, and I wouldn't have interrupted, mate. But Ruth, over to you for last word.
Thank you. I've actually got an original card there, Roger, sitting on my shelf. Smidsy. Yeah, no, fantastic show, and thank you everybody, especially the mapping thing. So today I went out in the pouring rain to go shopping on my bike, very heavily loaded. I have tweeted it. Came back, turned into my road, took the lane because I know how to, indicated to turn into where I live, and a tailgating driver at speed hooted at me. There was an oncoming driver at speed. He could see me. It's a short residential road. He decided not to let me go. So I had a bit of a wobble because my bike was so heavy and it was torrential rain. So the tailgating driver undertakes me close passing, still hooting. And I'm left kind of really upset. But, you know, I'm 68, I can cope with this. I still think one of the big things is bikeability, because long term, if every child has learned to cycle before they even get in a car, then we will see better behaviour in our residential streets. And, you know, we all know the cars have got bigger and wider, and the children go straight from being taken in a car to school to driving themselves. And it, you know, long term, we need every child to have been on a bike, and then it will grow. I'm having stupid arguments in Chiswick about our low traffic neighbourhoods, as everyone knows, and it's really not good enough. But I'm still here to tell the tale.